Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Space News. From now on, this will be a weekly show where I talk about all of the goings on in terms of space and astronomy and space exploration, all that kind of stuff. So, without further ado, let's get into the first episode. Today is going to be quite a Space Force and military focused episode, which is not necessarily what I wanted it to be. But we'll look at some other stuff too. We might delve in some supermassive black holes. But first of all, let's get into our first piece of news, which is that a drone pilot who flew a drone over the Vandenberg Space Force Base has received a sentence of 4 months. Vandenberg Space Force Base is, as you've probably guessed, a Space Force base around 180 miles north of LA. So in between LA and San Francisco on the Californian coast. Vandenberg Space Force Base has been a base from the US military since about the 40s, but it's been in the hands of the Air Force and the Army, and was made a Space Force base in 2021. And since 2021, it has apparently achieved 2,000 launches, which is pretty mind-boggling, and has uses from obviously the Space Force, the DoD, all of these kinds of military applications, but also NASA as well. And it is, get this, almost 100,000 acres with a 2.84 mile runway. Now, obviously, all of the goings on in this Space Force base are extremely secretive, but I'm going to butcher this name. Yin Piao Zhao from Brentwood, California, decided that they weren't so secretive and flew over the Space Force base for over an hour, taking 13 photos of the facility. He was then arrested while boarding a flight to China, and just now he has been sentenced 4 months in prison. But luckily for him, he's already served that time. He took the photos around a week or a few weeks after the US Space Force oversaw the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, the Minuteman III. But that's pretty much all we have on this story, because as you can imagine, lots of it is secretive. Okay, on to our second piece of news, and this time I had to get the notebook out, so you know it is a proper piece of news. So, the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope, yep, that is the name of the telescope, in Chile, has captured this image here of a supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy NGC 4945. This black hole, unlike our black hole at the center of the Milky Way, is extremely hungry, as in it wants to take pretty much all of the matter it can from its surroundings. In fact, officials at the ESO, or the European Southern Observatory, said the NGC 495 supermassive black hole is ravenous, consuming huge amounts of matter. This photo was part of a study from these scientists to learn more about galactic winds and how they've kind of shaped the history of our universe and how they might help galaxies form. So, what they found is that the supermassive black hole at the center of NGC 4945 might not be able to eat all of the matter, the gas and the dust that it wants to, because of galactic winds blowing it away. So, to really kind of dumb it down, a black hole, when it eats lots of dust and gas and all of this matter, it forms an accretion disk, which is kind of like a disk around a black hole, kind of like, I guess, the rings of Saturn, which is just filled with materials. So, thanks to friction, this disk gets really hot, causing the disk to emit X-rays and other forms of radiation. All of this radiation and newly energetic particles form the galactic winds, which are blowing gas and dust away from the black hole. The research also finds that galactic winds, or at least these galactic winds, are increasing in speed as they get further away from the supermassive black hole, which is kind of completely against all of kind of the preconceived, what everyone thought before this research. The research also found out that in this specific example of a galaxy, the galactic winds are kind of increasing in pace as they get further away from the supermassive black hole, which is atypical in galaxies and is completely different to what scientists thought and what scientists have seen in other galaxies. But sadly for me, I have a test to revise for, so I do not have time to learn even more about galactic winds. Okay, on to our final piece of news for the very first episode of Space News, and it is the title and thumbnail of this video. The US Space Force, the Space Force again, have commissioned what they're calling an orbital carrier, which essentially is going to be an aircraft carrier, but for things like satellites in space. The Space Force has set aside around $60 million to fund the new orbital carrier, which is going to be developed by Seattle-based space technology company Gravitics. According to a statement from Gravitics, the orbital carrier is supposed to, and I quote, carry multiple maneuverable space vehicles that can deliver a rapid response to address threats on orbit, which sounds pretty cool, right? We're going to have basically this in the air or in space, which is going to carry things like satellites, and I don't really know what a maneuverable space vehicle is, but some kind of hovercrafts or maneuverable satellites in orbit. But there is one thing that is pretty concerning. This is pretty worrying to me. I mean, this whole thing is practically being designed for the US to be able to defend their assets in orbit. I mean, what do you mean defend your assets in orbit? All this says to me is that they are practically preparing for war in space and are worried that, I don't know, Russia or China or something might try and attack one of their satellites. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be a crazy thing, you know. China isn't about to nuke the ISS for practically no reason. But I think what they're trying to do is trying to help maintain their spy satellites. So let's say they have a satellite which is flying over Russia or something like that, and Russia tries to kind of meddle with it a bit so it can't like take photos over Russia or something like that, which is kind of like the first piece of news in this video. But then they can launch things from the orbital carrier to kind of aid the spy satellite and bring it back to health. This comes just around weeks after one of the Space Force chiefs, General I don't know how to say this guy's name, but basically he is warning that if the US don't get their act together now, Russia and China are going to be able to completely ruin their satellites. Russia's anti-satellite test was in 2022, where they were able to kind of create a cloud of debris in low Earth orbit, which I assume basically blocks the capabilities of a spy satellite, and they can't take those photos through these clouds. And apparently, according to this general, that same year, so 2022, China grappled one of their defunct satellites and towed it into a graveyard orbit. The general has said that we're seeing grappling arms in space capable of towing another satellite or holding it hostage, when talking about that Chinese satellite towing one of the defunct satellites into a graveyard orbit. And he's also said that our near peers focusing on practicing dogfighting in space with satellites. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not want to be seeing dogfights in space, because it looks like the US is kind of preparing for war in space, or if not preparing for war, trying to protect its own satellites from its enemies. This is probably not the kind of thing that a random teenager on the internet should be kind of talking about and informing you on, but here we are. And if you want a random teenager on the internet informing you about all sorts of other space stuff, then please do subscribe and even like this video if you liked the video. I have videos planned on astrobiology, on space hotels, and of course this space news show will hopefully be a weekly occurrence. And I know that most of you are not subscribed, so please subscribe. Goodbye.